The concept Xiao is one of the most important guiding principles of the Chinese family. Usually translated filial piety, it is perhaps better glossed as obedience to parents during their lifetime and worship of their souls after death. Unfilial behavior is regarded as deeply reprehensible and, until recent times, was punishable by law. Likewise, parents have the reciprocal duty of caring for their children, just as ancestors are supposed and expected to help their descendants. My name is Jade, and I am in the Core 330 class, Gods, Ghosts, and Ancestors, a class that focuses on Chinese culture and ancestor worship. I've decided to focus my final project on ghost marriages. Before I get too deep into what a ghost marriage is, it's important for me to note that there is a school of thought that believes there are two different types of people in the afterlife. There are ancestors, people who have had children or who have some sort of connection to the living world in which they are worshipped, and there are ghosts. These are spirits that had no children and typically died fairly young. They may receive gifts from younger siblings, but since they have no familial descending line, they're usually not given much. You may find the practice of ghost marriages most popular in Taiwan and Singapore. In the literature that I've read, there are several different types of ghost marriages. I have decided to specifically focus on type 1. In this style of ghost marriages, one would find that it is always a female ghost who has become lonely or needs a form of ancestor worship to support herself in the afterlife. In Chinese customs, it is unlikely that she will have been worshipped by any family members because of her position as daughter, which means that she's not native to her own family. She was born to be married into somebody else's family. When this ghost becomes unhappy, she attempts to draw attention to herself by appearing in dreams or by causing misfortune to the family, and that could manifest itself in illness or chronic illness in the family, or even loss of jobs. It's important to note that this is never done maliciously, with vengeance, or any sort of malintent in mind. It's done so that the ghost can draw attention to their plight. What the family does next differs based on the ethnic group and culture that they belong to. What seems to be the most popular is that a red envelope full of money or a lock of the deceased's hair, even a fingernail, will be placed on a sidewalk or a bench or anywhere that's open to the general public. The family members will hide, wait in a different location, and watch, and the first man to pick up the object is the chosen one, based mostly on fortune. It's determined that if this man's status is appropriate, then the ceremony is planned. The men can't say no when this happens because they risk their own families coming under the fire of the ghost. There are many different versions of ghost marriages. Most recently, what you'll find is that there are grave robbers who actually make money off of selling the remains of young women to families with deceased sons who are looking to satisfy them and give them companionship in the afterlife. However, it can be more deadly than that, and some have been known to actually murder young women in China in order to be able to sell those bodies to these families. My project will take the form of a short story. I will be writing from the perspective of a Western journalist who is studying one specific family and their interaction with ghost marriage, and that's because it lends itself more to the opportunity of discussing the research and the cultural history behind why ghost marriages happen and how people usually approach ghost marriages, and that's a lot easier to do from a Westerner's perspective because Chinese people follow their culture, not necessarily explaining why they would do what they would do. It's a little bit more natural for it to be in the form of a Westerner actually researching what's happening in the lives that she's interacting with, as well as why and how that connects to the history of culture in China. And the story specifically will look at the desperation of a family hit by hard times, because many times this is the last step that a family will take in trying to improve the state of their lives. Many of these families will start by going to Eastern medicine specialists and Western doctors, and they exhaust all possible options before landing on ghost marriage. From the research that I've done and the personal stories that I've read, many times it's an older woman in the family that will suggest going to a spiritual medium or bring a spiritual medium in. And that's mostly because it's that older generation of women who actually subscribe to the belief of spiritual mediums. Now, the medium will usually find a connection to some sort of deceased child, and whether that was an unknown miscarriage or an abortion of a sibling that the matriarch had never told her family about, that's how the process of ghost marriages typically begins. My story will focus on Yu Mei Lin, who is going to be the ghost who observes both the actions of her families and the man she'll be marrying. Jiang Chonglin, who is the man who's been manipulated into marrying the ghost so that his wives and children will worship her. Yu Heng is Mei Lin's father, Yu Chengyin is Mei Lin's mother, and Cheng Dai Tai is Chonglin's first wife. Now, the Western journalist will be Parker Marlin. She's a short segment documentarian that both serves as the actions of every character, but also does her own research to better understand the how and why. I think that the subject is incredibly interesting and is so unique and different from Western culture that I think it's important for us to be able to see how important ancestor worship is. And I know that a lot of times in our classroom we talk about ancestor worship and the consequences of that, in that ghosts will go out of their way to make life a little bit harder for people. But I think that ghost marriage is an actual action that people will take that goes way above and beyond burning fake money and fake houses. Something that they do to protect themselves, but also to satisfy these young women who have died and have nobody that actually can worship them. So I think that it's been a really interesting research process for me to figure out how a young woman who has died plays into the whole familial structure and how that plays into the ancestor worship. So it's interesting because it's almost a transition from being a hungry ghost into a bountiful ancestor. And that's where I think the main point lies. And that's why I think that this is probably one of the most interesting core projects that I've gotten a chance to do research on. Thank you for spending the time and reading and watching my video.